Focus today back on finances, and when we talk finance, we like to talk to Gavin Martin. He's the founder and managing director of Cornerstone Wealth and has been talking to us about finances for quite some time now. Gavin, it's great to have you back on 2020 today.
Yeah, it's always great to be with you, Neil.
Gavin, today let's talk about how to bring finances under control. It's so easy, isn't it, for things to get out of control. You've got perhaps two pay packets coming into a household. They can go to separate accounts. They can get really messy if you've got multiple accounts and multiple credit cards and all sorts of issues. How do you bring everything under control easily?
Oh, you've hit on a few key issues there, Neil, when you talk about multiple accounts and credit cards. And if you then combine a mortgage with a drawdown facility as well, it can be a lethal weapon that can really put a bomb on your finances and mean that you get right out of control. And when I see people in that scenario, there's some key things that they need to do to ensure that they get back under control. The first one is that they need to separate their mortgage from their credit cards. Often banks like to combine credit cards and their pay coming into an offset account, and then what that enables people to do is just use the credit card. They then end up sometimes increasing their amount of their mortgage. So a key thing is to keep your credit cards and your spending separate from your mortgage. Almost leave your mortgage in a standard repayment arrangement, and then separate out how you actually spend your money. And one thing I often encourage people to do is, rather than using credit cards, focus on using debit cards instead, because it just gives you that so much more control than using credit cards.
So while you might be trying to be clever with your mortgage and having all sorts of credit cards or lines of credit and those sorts of things, what you're saying is the real wisdom is keep it separate, because then you'll be able to manage the residual finances that are there after you've paid your mortgage.
Yeah, those clever strategies where you combine it all together sometimes work really well, where you've got people who are ultra disciplined and they just save every single penny. They generally not spending much money. They're quite tight with their money almost. That scenario sometimes works well, but for the majority, it's better to separate those credit cards and spending from the mortgage. So how I generally encourage people to structure their finances is that they have if there's two incomes coming in, for example, you have those directed into a central transaction account that might be a joint account that you both use. When that money comes in, each pay packet, you direct immediately, have an automatic payment out to for a tithe, for example. So your giving comes out of it first. Then you might have your mortgage payment coming out. So that's a regular amount that you're pulling across each pay packet. Then you might have a provision for some other savings, whether that be for a new car or other major items. And then what you have left, that's what you live on. And so if that's $2,000 for the month, then you need to live on that $2,000 for the month. And the benefit of having that set up with a debit card rather than a credit card is that when your account gets down to zero and there's still a week before your next pay, you need to get creative about how you're going to get through that last week. And it's amazing what you can do. You could probably live out of what's in the pantry for a couple of weeks, really, if you tried hard.
Yeah, well, creativity is going to be a key, isn't it? That comes with not just a single creative mind out of a couple, but I guess that's opportunity there for a couple to be communicating together and getting creative together, because I guess nothing puts you out of control more than not being of one mind when it comes to finances.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key reason why finances is the number one argument starter and the number one reason for separation, divorce, is because it does reflect our preferences in life. And so if I want to go and buy early on in our marriage, I wanted to buy a new stereo for the car, and Meredith wanted to buy a picture, like a painting for the wall. She had no care for a new radio in the car, I had no care for a new picture on the wall, and so we needed to work out what our priorities were. Once we got those priorities aligned, we were able to really, draw closer together, work together to achieve those goals, and include our respective radio purchase and painting purchase goals somewhere along the spectrum. But there were other goals that we had that were of higher priority that we focused on together first.
In the perfect world, you could have bought the stereo and the picture, but not all of us. When we find ourselves, when it all boils down and what dollars are left at the end of the week, we can't always do both purchases. And really it comes down to that relationship together between a husband and wife, that couple, so that they are able to then, as you say, get creative.
Yes, exactly. And I don't think we actually bought either of those things for a while, to tell you the truth. We had other priorities that we realised that were well above that. So it was an important step for us to get together to talk about what our focus really was. And that directed where we actually used our finances. Yeah.
And when you talk about credit cards and debit cards, it is easier, isn't it, to go and put something on credit than even using the debit card, because you know that you're spending your own money when you're using your debit card.
Yeah, exactly. And I used credit cards for years, particularly when I was before I was married. And the whole idea that I thought that most people say is that I'm getting, frequent flyer points and I'm getting 30 days interest-free. But it is so liberating to move to the stage where you actually use a debit card, because you just don't get those surprises. I used to still get surprises that, I thought I only spent $2,000 this month, but I spent $3,000, and you've got to then work around that at the time that the credit card's due. Having a debit card and knowing exactly what you're spending, because you can't spend more than the money that you have, is just such a liberating experience. I really benefited from it, and others have as well.
Just quickly too, Gavin, when it comes to the number of accounts, you mentioned, bring all of those streams of whether your pay packets are coming in together into one account. It's very easy, isn't it, to have all sorts of bank accounts open that you don't need.
Yeah, I like the centralised account because you're both using the money that's remaining in that account, and it encourages you to talk about how you're going to spend that remaining money. That's why I like joint accounts, because you ideally have your finances bringing you closer together rather than further apart. Having a joint account encourages that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have a range of accounts. Like, for example, if you've got an emergency fund, that might be $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 sitting in that emergency fund, and it's wise to potentially sit that across into a high yielding account in the lower income earner's name. So you might have an account over there, you might have another account that you're using to save for the purchase of a new car when your current car needs replacing. So I don't necessarily think that it's bad to have a range of accounts. I think where you run into trouble is where there's a range of accounts and then a range of credit cards, and you're trying to juggle paying off one credit card with another credit card, and that's where you start to get into a bit of difficulty.
Well, it's always good advice, and I guess for people looking at their own personal finances, to seek their own advice from their personal financial advisor would be a wise thing to do. And Gavin Martin from Cornerstone Wealth, there'll be a link to Cornerstone Wealth on the vision.org.au website page for 2020. Gavin, it's been great talking. Thanks for being with us again today.
It's always a pleasure, Neil. Thanks again.